When it comes to summarizing values using pivot tables, there's one thing that's extremely important to understand, and it's something that I call the count of trap. And if you've been using pivot tables for a reasonable amount of time, I'd be willing to bet that you've run into this issue, whether or not you've realized it. And to show you what I mean, let's go into our pivot and we'll drag gross revenue out of the field list and then select it and pull it back into values. Now, when we do that, you'll see that Excel defaulted to summarizing those revenue numbers as a sum. So we're looking at the sum of gross revenue. And that makes sense in this case. Revenue is a counting metric. It's a volume metric. So when we roll up revenue at the genre or country level, it makes sense to take those individual revenues by title and sum them together to display a total. But then why, when we try to drag in a similar counting or volume metric like total number of reviews, does it default to count of? Now, this drove me absolutely nuts for the longest time, and it's not because it's a tough problem to solve. All you do is right click and change to sum. Problem is that if you don't catch this or you're not vigilant about looking out for it, your numbers will be way off when you're expecting them to be summed. So the golden question is, why does this happen? And the answer has to do with blank and non-numeric cells. So let's do a little demo here. Let's pull revenue and total reviews back out, and we'll go into our movie database, and I'll just scroll up to the top. Now here's my gross revenue column, and keep in mind this column was the one that was properly defaulting to the sum of mode. But what if I choose one specific value and delete the value so that it's a blank cell? If we go back to our pivot, refresh the pivot, and then drag gross revenue in, now all of a sudden it's defaulting to count of. The exact same issue that we were seeing with the total reviews column, simply because there's one cell in the entire column that has a blank instead of a value. So in this case, a few ways to fix it. I could replace the blank with a 0. I could right click and change the summarization mode to a sum, but you've got to be vigilant about watching out for when that happens. Now let's just Control Z a few times so that we replace this with its original value. I want to make sure that stays there. Let's follow the same logic to take a look at our total reviews column. This will help us understand or diagnose the issue with this column as well. So I'm going to use a little shortcut, select O2, and then I'm going to use the Control arrow down shortcut, and that jumps all the way down to the last contiguous cell containing data. So if there is a break in data, like a blank cell for instance, it'll take me directly to it. If I continue down with Control arrow, it takes me all the way to the bottom, which means that this is the only cell, O2276, with a blank value. So to fix that, all I need to do is replace it with a 0, go back to my pivot, refresh, and then drag total reviews, and now I'm getting a sum exactly like I'd expect. So not a tough fix, but something that will absolutely drive you off the wall until you understand why it's really happening. And keep in mind that the same applies, whether it's a blank cell or whether it's a text string like NA, whatever it might be. So bottom line, just make sure that you're watching out, make sure that you're using the correct summarization modes, and that you don't have fields that you're accidentally summarizing with a count instead of a sum.